Thanks.
All right, we'll give everyone just like another minute or two. I'm sure people will keep popping in, but we'll get started in a minute.
Hey guys, this is Pavel speaking. Yeah, I just wanted to say maybe for like insight, I started working last year. I had some time on something like a private journaling app with interface like Medium on top of IPFS. So that's why I'm joining this call to kind of figure out or like see how you are doing the non-silo, data storage.
Cool. Yeah, hopefully we'll get into a bit of that today.
Cool, thanks.
All right, awesome. So I guess we'll get started. People will keep joining, but we have a lot to cover, and we only have an hour. So thanks for everyone for signing up. And if you sort of left questions or topics to discuss, we recorded those down. So hopefully if you've asked any questions up front or things you wanted to learn about, we'll cover those. If not, this is going to be, since our first community call, yeah, feel free to just ask questions and we'll try to get through as much content as we can. But it's going to be a lot of like background and framing. And so, yeah, it'll be pretty freeform. So first, welcome everyone. We, as you sort of, I guess, probably saw on Twitter or on Discord somewhere, we first announced Ceramic last week. And so it's something that we've been working on as a team and sort of like defining the requirements for quite a while now, probably since right after midpoint of last year, or like, I guess a little later, maybe around DevCon of last year, we started really trying to define what Ceramic and the protocol might be. And so here we'll just first cover like an intro to what is Ceramic, then we'll go into some specifics around Ceramic documents, talk about some use cases enabled by Ceramic, then we can jump into some specifics around DIDs and identity management, how to integrate with Ceramic, and discuss some timing for when Ceramic will have its public launch, and then cover some more like specific information about like the organization and some of the technology dependencies and general comments. But yeah, feel free to ask questions throughout and we'll just keep this pretty open. So I guess I'll kick us off with just an intro. So Ceramic is a way to permissionlessly create and access documents, which can sort of represent any kind of information. So these Ceramic documents are censorship resistant, signed, append only, and permalinked. So you can basically create version documents that are verifiable and accessible by all platforms. And it's a really powerful primitive we found to, from our perspective, like, for some context, before we started Ceramic, we were working on 3Box. And 3Box really needed a decentralized information system to sort of store some of its identities and key management stuff, as well as things like profiles and schemas for databases and routing information. So Ceramic sort of arose out of that need. And then as we were developing it, we started realizing that, these append-only documents are just a really powerful primitive for all sorts of use cases. And then we sort of expanded the definition or sort of our understanding of what could be possible to include all sorts of things. And we've been getting a bunch of feedback from the community on some new use cases that we probably hadn't considered, like just general information publishing. And so, yeah, I guess I'll stop there as just like a quick intro. Is that clear? Is there anything else that we can provide to just help you understand like the core mechanics of Ceramic? And Joel, feel free to jump in with anything that I may have missed there.
Yeah, I guess one thing that you left out is like every kind of update that is made to one of these documents are anchored into a blockchain, which means that you have like a provable kind of record of how the document history has evolved.
So quick question around that. With the documents, right,
are these going to be like cryptographically signed so you can verify the entire chain? And then you just put the hash on the blockchain, or is the entire thing going to be running on chain?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So yeah, it's like its own append-only log, and that's signed by the owner or the owners of the document. And the anchor on chain is actually there will be one or there will be multiple services that provide like an anchoring kind of capability that basically takes a bunch of documents and creates a Merkle tree and just anchors the root of that Merkle tree on chain.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yep. And so the document log lives in IPFS and dates are encoded in IPLD. And sort of you just take those updates and you anchor each one on chain. You can do that individually, like a user themselves can anchor their own update if they wanted to not sort of rely on an anchoring service, or you could, submit a bunch of users can submit a bunch of update hashes to an anchor service, which aggregates them all and, updates in one transaction on the blockchain.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds awesome.
And so on this topic of documents, it's sort of like the core capability of Ceramic. We started out by defining a couple standard doc types. So a document basically defines rules for what constitutes a valid update to the document so you can verify the state. And different document types will have different requirements for updates and state verification. And so you can define these in any way that you want. And so to start out, we just thought it would be useful to define 3 doc types that enable a use case like 3box, which is what we were working on before we started working on this initiative also, is interoperable data management system. And so for that type of system to work, we need decentralized identities that can be controlled by many different private keys and that can publicly link to public keys. So you can sort of verify that these keys are owned by the same set of users or user. And we needed a way to sort of link that identity to a profile or link that identity to its various data sources that may live in peer-to-peer databases on hosting services or may live elsewhere. So a way to map this identity to all of its resources. And so the first 3 documents we created were 3ID, which was the DID-based identity system used within 3box, where you have a public identifier that can sign and encrypt information, and you can control it by one or many blockchain account key pairs. We currently support Ethereum, but as Ceramic is generally agnostic, we're already working on support for Polkadot and things like Arweave. And so you'll be able to control it with any of your network keys or crypto keys, and that's a document. So it's called 3ID. And then we have this notion of account links. And so this is the public mapping from a 3ID to, or a DID to another public cryptographic identity that's capable of signing. So basically you can create this public auditable ownership link between the two. And so now you can like query the network and see that these accounts are the same DID. And so they can share the same profile. So you can, and data. And so you can start to like broaden and make all these identity systems interoperate. And the third one is a tile. And tiles are just sort of the most generic data document type on Ceramic. And those are basically like the genesis of a tile just contains some contents and has owners. And the owners have to sign the initial genesis, and then you can update it. And so those are really valuable for things like creating like a public discoverable data schema, where you define a schema and that's a tile, and you can update that schema with new additions or new modifications, and you can always reference that specific schema by its version. And so you can then use those to create other tiles where you reference that Ceramic tile, say it's a profile schema, and then in your specific tile, you add your profile data. So it gives like a structure that you can interpret that tile from. You can also use tiles to store mappings to all of your database resources, wherever they live. You can define various bits of metadata about yourself or your service or your application. And for a service, like a web service that may want to operate permissionlessly, or sort of provide shared access to its service, like an API or a data hosting service that needs to provide open access to user data for various reasons, they can define a service policy as a tile. And that includes things like a description of their service, maybe routing information, so the endpoint where they can access it, maybe even things like payment requirements. So the things that a consumer of that service may need to meet in order for that service to perform its function. So you can think of those as a way to sort of replace API keys. Now you don't need to sort of operate a backend to manage a server from a silo that's specific to your app, but rather services can just run permissionlessly and sort of provide service according to these policies. And so those are sort of all of the requirements that we needed to make data storage permissionless, data interoperable, and identities cross-chain and user controlled, if that makes sense. And so Joel, what else did I miss there?
I don't think I can't think of anything right now. We have a few questions in the chat.
Cool.
Sorry?
You want to take them?
Yeah, so the first one is, it would be interesting to know if you can support exploding links or expiring links to address data directly in protocol. Yeah, I haven't thought about this too much. I know that you can make exploding or like expiring links through through centralized services. I haven't thought about too much how you could do that in a decentralized way. I don't know, Pavel, if you have more thoughts about that.
So when I was building and thinking about this like private journaling application, the milestones or like second version that I wanted to build was have basically sharing some data with other people, or just maybe creating a link like you can do in Google Drive, where you can restrict the access, right? Like you can basically like delete that link, right? Basically, so you would revoke that access to the data. And so then on top of IPFS, Textile.io did a couple of these kind of like patterns that they implemented into separate library, where you can do expiring links, you can do basically static links to some data that you can update the data, right? So you can think about it more in like Web3 manner.
Yeah, I think
Web2 manner. So that's where I'm coming from.
Okay. Yeah, I think like I would need to think about it more, but if you have like ideas of how that could work in the protocol, like it would be super cool if you wanted to like write a note about that or something. I think it should be possible to have some kind of, basically you create like a document and then you add data to it, and then like you have some kind of different type of record for the document that kind of says delete all this previous data and like references only the first like Genesis record of the document. But yeah, I think we would need to explore that but yeah, seems interesting. You had another question, is database like capabilities included? So it's not included directly in Ceramic, but Ceramic is designed to kind of allow you to link to databases. So link to a Ceramic, or sorry, link to a Textile or an OrbitDB database, or possibly other types of databases. So we kind of designed Ceramic as being this kind of first layer that kind of allows you to have this user identity, and that points to some kind of information about where you can find different databases in the network. All right, so Anonym asks, who pays to run storage servers? So right now, Ceramic doesn't have like built-in basically way of paying for storing or like incentives for storing. So instead, you can kind of spin up your own Ceramic node, and you can tell that node which documents to pin. And basically, as long as you run your node, those documents will be pinned in a network. So it's up to like everyone running nodes to like make sure that the data that they care about is available in the network.
And Ben, yeah, so Ben, there's, and I guess it's probably a good time to mention this. We're going to be hosting a technical webinar and protocol demo just because we didn't think there was so much time to do all that in the same one. I'll post the link here for that so we can share that out. You guys can join if you want.
Yeah, cool, thanks.
All right, awesome. Cool. Yeah, so there's the link to sign up for the technical webinar. It's like basically this time next week, just an hour earlier, so at 11 a.m. Eastern. Cool. All right, so I think that's all the questions there so far, right? Yep. And so next up on the agenda, so we've covered just general overview, some intro to documents, some use cases for documents, so sort of mention those. And if there's any more questions, like things we haven't discussed that we can cover are probably like storing a public social graph in Ceramic where it can be universally accessed, or storing verifiable credentials, sort of like in the Genesis, creating a verifiable credential, and then the creator that can add recipients to that document as well and remove them. And to make it more easily discoverable, the user who they're adding can also like make a reference to that document in their 3ID. So you create sort of this user-centric graph of information.
Yeah, an interesting part about verifiable credentials also is that most kind of verifiable credential systems that at least I've seen so far requires you to kind of, if you want to revoke the credential, you either need some kind of trusted third party that you ask if the credential has been revoked or not, or you kind of have to publish something directly in like a blockchain registry that like, and you have to like look that up on a specific blockchain smart contract maybe to like see if the verifiable credential has been revoked. But in Ceramic, you only need to sync the data of that specific document that includes the verifiable credential to actually like revoke it.
Cool. And so I guess in this use case section, there was a question, I think that Konstantin asked about what new business models can be unlocked by this. The answer is all sorts of new business models. I mean, at a minimum, sort of making web services and any sort of API business permissionless is like one key innovation here, is that like now you don't have to sort of have users create accounts at every web service. Rather, you can just create something, publish it to the network with a service policy, and allow anyone to access it if they meet your specific requirements. That's one. I mean, as it's a new way of sort of publishing information, there's all new sorts of things that can be built. Open to any recommendations and thoughts that people have, but the answer is many, at a minimum, web services.
So on the recommendations or ideas side, there's some really cool projects I've been working with, like Metagame and SourceCred, that essentially work to create like a graph of contributors across a project, right? So I don't know if you guys are familiar with SourceCred or not, but yeah, exactly, right? It's awesome. So essentially, it runs a PageRank on a contributor graph, easy to run on like GitHub or Discourse or whatever, to identify how people are contributing. And then Metagame is taking that a step further to create player profiles around that game, so people can have an identity, they can engage in the game, earn points, earn badges, have tokens, you know, all those types of things to really like gamify it on a social network level. Man, this is really cool, because if you can have all of that data be cryptographically signed, so people's like, you know, actual keys for their accounts and their like bios and all the stuff they've engaged with can actually be verified, then it makes SourceCred a whole hell of a lot easier to run, because you can't run PageRank on chain. So you have to have this like trust but verify model where you run SourceCred and verify it was run correctly. And right now, this just requires someone who knows what's going on to check that someone else who knows what's going on did it right. But if you have all of that like linked via cryptographic hashes, you can actually just submit a proof of computation along with the computation of SourceCred to say, hey, this was run correctly. And then everyone can just be like, okay, great. And people can focus on playing the game versus the technical complexity, which would be really, really great.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this particular use case as well, and I think like you can like basically. So I was listening in on the metagame call where they kind of distributed kind of seeds for so that they distributed like their token for like an event they did, and like it took a long time to go through and like figure out who did what. And if you can like create schemas for different types of tasks and then have people submit, like I did this task and that task and 2 of this other task, and then like link that to the kind of event in some way, like then like you can like make that a lot more kind of scalable.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because right now there's like the graph that runs on like, you know, like social activity on like a forum or chat or whatever, which is easy. But then there's lots of other things that are way more manual and like don't quite fit in well. So yeah, if you can have like an easy like schema or form for that, and people can just like, you know, add their information in async, and then you can just like run all of that and link it into the larger graph, that would be wonderful. It would be really, really great.
Yeah, exactly. That would be like super cool.
Yeah, this is a conversation we've been having internally as well. Awesome. And so we also have a lot of questions about that came in about just wanting to understand the relationship of DIDs in the system and how specifically 3ID manages DIDs and identities, and how it can support all sorts of DID methods. And so I guess starting, as we've sort of already covered, like every document created needs to be signed by a DID. That DID can sort of live anywhere as long as it's resolvable. But to start, we like created a native DID system for Ceramic. That's the first implementation. People can build other ones, but it's called 3ID. And basically the way that 3ID works is 3IDs technically are just like really, really thin. And they're just an interface for an entity to interact with other services. So it can sign messages and it can encrypt data. And with that, you can do access control, and you can sort of like have a universal platform agnostic identifier for an entity, which can be a user, it can be an organization, it can be a DAO, can be whatever. And that DID is managed by a set of private keys. And those are basically the DID's keychain. And there's going to be like a keychain tile where users can add all of their private accounts from whatever they're using. It can be, you know, a specific database, can be a specific blockchain network, can be just a private key pair, anything. And sort of this allows you to control your entity's universal identifier from whatever wallet or platform or system you're using. And that's sort of like the core of the DID is like these two things. And then if you want to publicly associate this DID to those accounts, you then create account link documents for them. And so this maintains privacy where you can, you know, control a DID with all of your keys, but not publicly disclose that all of those keys are linked. But if you wanted to publish those links, then you create account links. And that allows those public keys to be resolved to the DID and all of the DID's resources and profiles and documents and things. And so that's kind of the core of it. You can always like extend it with, you want to add a tile for a profile, and then you can just publish public profile information there and then link that tile to the DID. You can have a tile that manages all of your resources. So every database that gets added that you want to associate, you kind of plug in there and then map that to the DID. and entries in that can also be encrypted. So you don't like look at a DID and just publicly discover all of its resources. The user can like encrypt those. So only if they disclose it to an application can that resource be discovered. So you create that like level of indirection between identity and resources. Also, you can map verifiable credentials to it and all sorts of things. Any more questions on that? Does that make sense?
Quick question on the privacy aspect of that. So if you have a key, right, that you control that then controls your DID, and the DID controls many keys across many apps and blockchains and wallets and whatever, right? And then you selectively link a few of those to say like, here's my public profiles, and then here's, you know, whatever else, right? Then that process of actually going through the linking and the management of the keys, there would probably need to be like some sort of client or something that the user would then use to do that, either a CLI or like an app they download or whatever. And then so to make that work, would the user then kind of have to like run their own node or have their own client if they wanted full privacy? And then if they don't really care, they could just use a third-party web app or something that kind of like does it for them? Or like, how are you guys thinking about that?
Cool, Joel, want to weigh in?
Yeah, I guess there's like a few ways to answer that. So right now we're working with 3box, working on a system where we kind of control the 3ID in an iframe and basically allow different Web3 providers to like authenticate into the 3ID, and the key material kind of lives inside of this iframe. We're also kind of specifying something called a DID provider, which is similar to kind of, if you know about the Ethereum JSON RPC, it's similar, but for just general DID interactions. And that would allow any wallet to kind of be compatible with this DID standard. And wallets that want to be like more closely integrated with the Ceramic ecosystem could easily like add support for 3ID and like that kind of management. And potentially that could also be like a way in which you can like link multiple different wallets together if they like both support this 3ID system. Does that answer fully your question?
Kind of. I mean, the question itself is a bit fuzzy, so like, but yeah, I mean, I guess that kind of makes sense. So you're going to create kind of the protocols and schemas around the whole thing, and then allow people, well, and then you'll create an instance of it to start with, and allow people to kind of build and integrate into it. And as that happens, then users will be able to choose whatever kind of version works best for them. Is that kind of the idea?
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And I guess to add to that, so the Ceramic network itself is not limited to only using 3IDs. It can support like other DID methods as well. So that's like also like an option.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, but this DID provider for wallets will be super cool because, you know, like for 3box, we started using 3ID internally, and then we pulled it out into this separate identity wallet SDK. Which is like native 3ID, it's like a 3ID RPC basically. But then we now want to generalize that further to just a DID provider and provide like common interfaces. So once wallets start to natively integrate these DID providers, then they can like manage the security of their keys in the ways that they already are, which is probably the most secure way to do it versus like, you know, in an iframe, which maybe even the code is hosted on IPFS or something. So you can verify the code isn't like improperly managing or handling your keys, but it's just like levels of security, but it just depends on the implementation. Okay, cool. So moving on a little bit from identity, and there's some questions about comparisons with Uport. And so we actually got started on Uport. That was where Joel and myself and a few others that are working on the protocol first got started. I was a co-founder of Uport, and then we branched out into 3box, where we started developing this IPFS-based identity system and 3ID, and then kind of evolved further into Ceramic. And so a lot of the thinking and learnings came from a lot of those systems. But again, we're always in search of the more general, abstract, more protocol-based approach for some of those things. Then there was another question about support and potentially interoperability with DIDCOM standards. So also sort of some of the work in the Decentralized Identity Foundation and W3C. Joel, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah. So DIDCOM is like a way to like send messages and like basically like send messages between the IDs. And I think the spec is still like a little bit not fully finalized, but it seems like that will be like fully compatible with Ceramic and like the 3ID dead systems. So like that's more a way of like communicating between the IDs, whereas Ceramic is kind of a way to store like these persistent documents.
All right. Cool. I guess next is questions on how to integrate. So Joel, I want to talk about the libraries without going too in depth.
Yeah. So we're right now working on a TypeScript implementation of Ceramic. So that will include a kind of Ceramic core node that like basically implements all of the protocol and talks to an IPFS node to be able to like add these documents and talk to like an anchoring service to like anchor the documents on a blockchain, and also like use libp pub/sub to gossip updates about documents. So all of that will be included in the Ceramic node software. And then we're also building an HTTP client and a CLI tool. So the CLI will spin up a daemon that provides like an HTTP API, similar to like how a Go IPFS has like an HTTP API. And the HTTP client will be like a very thin Ceramic client that allows you to talk to a node that runs the Ceramic protocol without actually running the Ceramic protocol locally. So that might be useful if you're running on like a resource constrained device or something. But you will still be able in this HTTP client to like actually sign and decrypt data locally to that instance. So I think that's the general overview. So there will be like a CLI tool, but it will also be this JavaScript library that you can run in the browser. Yeah, I think that's mostly it.
Yeah, and like just to repeat again, and there's a link in the chat. The Typeform link is a sign up for the technical webinar next Thursday, where we'll go more in depth on some of those things and really demo the code.
Yeah, so at that webinar, I will kind of read through and go through the entire spec of Ceramic and like open up for questions, and then I will kind of demo the CLI tool and like show how you can use Ceramic to, or how you can like interact with Ceramic.
Awesome. So Vasa, I think he's still here, had a question about how, I'm looking for him, about how Ceramic fits into the broader Web3 ecosystem, and asked if there were dApp frameworks that can be built around it. Vasa, do you have any more context for that question? Or did we already cover some of it? If he's there. All right, well, if he's not, the question's a bit fuzzy. Yeah, so I mean, like we designed Ceramic as this really horizontal interoperability piece across the Web3 stack. So we actually see it connecting all these disparate Web3 pieces in like a nice way. So you might be able to just build dApps on Ceramic itself, but we more imagined it just sort of like integrating with the other pieces that you need. So whatever wallet you want to use for your system, or whatever providers you want to use, and whatever database systems you want to use, and whatever like microservices that support your dApp, wherever your app is hosted, like all of those things can be configured, and Ceramic just sort of like runs in the middle and does like identity, routing, and access control and stuff like that. And so hopefully that's clear. But yeah, open for a lot of suggestions there. Like Vasa, I know that we were talking about how you can build like how a database could be natively integrated with Ceramic. And basically, I think you were like setting up the MongoDB type interface for OrbitDB. And how that could work is like you could instead of like defining your schemas inside of the database and like defining your, tables and stuff, you could migrate that information to Ceramic. And you could also sort of not use the native like identity system for the database, like a key. You can actually just tie that to the Ceramic DID, whether that's 3ID or other. And then you can have this database hosted on a service or wherever. And now users can provide access control to that database regardless of which wallet they're using or which app they're on. And other apps know how to interpret that data that's being stored in the database because they can see the schema that's published on the network and referenced. And so you basically take a lot of the internals of the database and you move it to this shared information system. And so the databases can sort of interoperate by migrating logic out of it and more into the shared space. Cool, I see a question come in. Is there a good analogy to the Web 2 stack for Ceramic to Web 3? Russ, what do you mean by that?
I'm just trying to grok what you guys have done, and I was wondering, before the blockchain, before all these Web3 technologies, we had the internet, and was there a piece in that world that we could analogize to communicate this idea quickly to people who might be more familiar with Web 2? But the answer could be no, and maybe I'm just trying to take a shortcut to like spending a few more hours trying to dig into what you guys have done. So, but if you had something for me, I'd really appreciate it.
So there's no good answer. There's like, it's analogous to like what OAuth was really trying to do, but it's like OAuth++. And also like there's a project that gets mixed reviews when you mention it because it was the biggest vaporware project in history, but it's like Project Xanadu was like trying to create this like public discoverable permalinked information graph where like you don't have link rot, you can have version updates, you can display diffs between documents that sort of are accessed by any interface across the web. And they just like didn't have the tech to build it. Like it still isn't really usable. But like with IPFS and IPLD and DIDs and all of these pieces to Web3, now you can actually make something like this work in blockchain anchoring. And so it's like kind of like a combination of those concepts of like just like completely available, verifiable version documents. And there's a bunch of uses for them that, because they're public and permissionless and can be accessed by any interface, then it creates this powerful primitive. And a lot of the use cases we've been discussing are around like identity management or like interoperable databases or like permissionless web services, but those are just a few. Like you could use a Ceramic document to just publish like content that you want to be there. It's just like a universal publishing platform. And so it's pretty like low level.
Yeah, super cool. I mean, you guys seem to have abstracted this general pattern from the identity use case with Reebox and trying to understand exactly the implications of that, but it seems really exciting.
Awesome. Yeah, let us know how we can make this more clear if it's not, because it is, that's always the challenge, is like trying to provide this really horizontal, abstract protocol, which is great, that can do anything, but it's like, how do you communicate that? And by providing it super horizontally, like people can be creative, and there's use cases that we don't even imagine, right? Because there's no way that we can know, in the same way that they built Ethereum and they're like, we don't really know what's gonna emerge from this new way of doing things. And so, yeah, we're looking forward to all the stuff that people come up with. All right, what else do we have here? Cool, Joel. So there's a couple questions. We'll get to some organization stuff, like who's backing Ceramic or who's developing Ceramic and value capture. But you want to talk about the tech? So there's some questions around dependencies on IPFS and Filecoin and like scaling. So you want to talk about some of those things?
Yeah. So yeah, ceramic uses IPFS pretty heavily, and like uses something in IPFS. There's a thing called IPLD, which is a way of like describing data and describing linked data in particular. And we use that to kind of create the structure and the append-only log that allows you to like verify the history of these documents, but also to verify the anchors that are like the Merkle trees that like anchor the documents into the blockchain. So all of that lives in IPLD and in IPFS and uses libpdp, which IPFS and also Ethereum 2 uses to like communicate updates. So that's kind of the two core pieces that Ceramic relies on. And then it also relies on blockchains. And we're going to start with using Ethereum for anchoring these documents. But really any blockchain is possible to use to anchor documents. Then there's like, so that's kind of the core of it. And then like, since we're using IPFS, do we require Filecoin, or how does that work? So Ceramic has no like requirements on any type of kind of crypto economic systems except for like any blockchain. So Filecoin could be used in combination with Ceramic to like back up documents, but there might be cases where you wouldn't want to use Filecoin. If you're like in an like offline, more peer-to-peer environment where you don't have like a direct connection to the internet, you might still want to be able to like communicate updates to these documents while still being kind of not connected to the global internet. And if you like store these files on like a blockchain systems, then you wouldn't be able to do that. So that's kind of a nuance there. But yeah, you could possibly use like Filecoin or Arweave or what are the other, StoreJ and Sia to like back up these documents, but it's not a requirement. And then in terms of like scalability of this Ceramic network and like all these documents, so there's like two pieces there. So one is like the capability and like how much document anchors can we actually put on a blockchain. So since we only put kind of a Merkle root of a bunch of different documents that are being anchored at the same time, that allows us to like kind of parallelize a lot of document updates at the same time. And there could also be like multiple different anchoring services that work on different blockchains. So the blockchain throughput limit is not really much of a problem. The other piece is how do we kind of get the latest updates of a document. And right now we're using libpdp pubsub to kind of gossip about these updates. And we're using just like one pubsub topic, which means that every node in the Ceramic network would like hear about all the updates to all of the documents as they happen, and all of the requests to get kind of the latest state of documents. And like having all nodes share all of that as the network grows is not great, but that can easily be scaled by basically sharding this pub subtopic into like multiple topics, and that can like that works should work quite well. So I think those are kind of the main. Let's see if I missed something. Yeah, I guess I can talk also a little bit about the different kind of ways to store semantic data on Ceramic. So with especially like the Ceramic tiles, which is like the generic document type, is you can store like any JSON formatted data. And that means you could use already existing kind of linked data schemas. A common example of this is schema.org, and you can like just use that kind of reference in a Ceramic tile to describe the content of your document. And you can, since the kind of Ceramic tiles are really generic, you could like add basically like any type of schema for JSON data as you want. And we're also working, but that is like limited to this, like if you use schema.org, that's limited to like the limitations of like the HTTP protocol, where schema.org might change the schema or something like that. So one thing that we think would be really cool is actually store the schemas inside of Ceramic itself, which means that you have these kind of immutable but updatable references to schemas. And they can also be, you can also like refer to specific versions of that. So that's something that we hope to enable as well.
Cool. And there was another, so in a slight pivot back to some integration. So before we continue on a little bit, just sort of saying how this can be used. So like, if at a minimum, like if your app wanted to create Ceramic documents to store and publish content, or sort of allow users to access public profiles and get them from the network or anything, you can just integrate the Ceramic client in your app, so JS Ceramic, and that will give you all the functionality of Ceramic. But if you wanted to sort of create and enable your app to use like distributed peer-to-peer databases, then you may also include like another library for that, like whether it's like 3box provides 3ID enabled access to these Orbit databases, or Textile or something. Like you can just add in the features that you need, but at a minimum, like if you just wanted to create Ceramic documents and publish, you could just use the JS Ceramic client, like pretty simply. And we're also working with some indexing services. So services like the Graph will be indexing Ceramic documents. And so if you just needed to get data to populate like a dashboard or something with profiles, or show other sorts of documents without enabling users to create or update them, you could like just integrate their API and you'll be able to pull Ceramic data in like a pretty performant and lightweight way.
Yeah, I guess a note on that is that the Ceramic, or sorry, these kind of indexing services that like indexes the Ceramic network will only really be able to like index the public data on the network. The encrypted data that lives on Ceramic will like not be like possible to index in the same way. So there you kind of actually need the node to like sync that data. And you also need the user to have the key to the data.
Cool. So I think we've covered some of that. All right, so we've got like 10 minutes left. So quickly, I'll just cover, there were some org questions, like who's backing or building Ceramic, and like what is some of the future of that. And so Ceramic is an open source project, and it's completely separate from 3box. And so like, because we sort of like thought of it, we are the sort of some of the ones building it first, but it's all public and others are already starting to contribute. So it's a really community driven project and will continue to be. And so the resources are as much as the projects that are contributing to the development want to provide. Eventually there will likely be some sort of incentive token for some pieces of the Ceramic network. So that's coming down the line, but until we sort of start to see some of the problems observed and ways that a token can potentially solve some of those issues, we don't want to do that too prematurely. We'd rather like observe how people are using it and like solve a real problem. So it's sort of like the sustainability of it. And on some of that topic, there's like obviously our Discord is public and open, and a bunch of people are contributing use case ideas and thoughts on how to improve Ceramic and how to make it more interoperable with different chains and systems. And so if you're interested, let me just drop an invite link here. Yeah, I mean, a lot of you are probably already in the Discord, but in case you're not, copy this. So here's the Discord. And we also have the Ceramic Ecosystem Alliance, which is like a group of projects more actively collaborating on standards and use cases in a bit more of a formal way. It's just people that want to be more actively participating. And so if that sounds interesting, there is a sign up for the Ecosystem Alliance. And so with all of these groups together, we're sort of trying to involve as much of the community as possible. So it's more of a collaborative effort because things like this have to be. So on that note, more questions, like we can open the floor. We have 9 minutes left. Obviously, if there are none, we can give back the time, but yeah, I'd be interested to hear what you thought. Anything we didn't cover, or could we make more clear?
I mean, you might have covered this, I might have missed it, Mike, but how does 3box leveraging ceramic now, and how do you plan to leverage it in the future, if not now?
Yeah, so, well, ceramic isn't live yet, but so Mike is actually doing the first integration of 3box with ceramic. And so I like to think of ceramic as being the decentralization and so increasing decentralization of 3box and improving interoperability of 3box. That happens in 2 ways. So it's like implicit centralization and explicit centralization, and ceramic kind of handles both of those. So explicitly, 3IDs are currently managed on a server run by 3box Inc. And so it just all these mappings from account, like blockchain keys to a 3ID to resolve a profile, are stored on a server. And so ceramic, 3box will migrate its entire identity system into 3ID and ceramic to make everything actually decentralized and verifiable. And implicitly, we're pulling out all of the embedded logic that went into databases and how our clients connect to nodes on the network into ceramic. So the 3box client, like the JS library, will be super lightweight, and it will sort of look to ceramic for which databases it needs to sync and where those databases live, because we can't assume they're going to live on 3box Inc. anymore. They could actually live anywhere. And so we're taking all of the like database access control, like database routing logic, schemas, and we're just publishing all that to the network. So ceramic handles all that, and 3box just becomes like a lightweight service. And I hope there are a bunch of different types of services that end up like using ceramic to sort of do the same thing, because then, you know, Orbit DBs and Textile DBs and other database types like that are all sort of act like using the same interoperability protocol. It doesn't matter how you're storing it, and it gives developers a lot more flexibility in like using different databases for specific use cases and needs, rather than like only needing to choose one and being locked into that. Make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's a good explanation. Thanks.
Cool. Is it possible to delete data, Joel?
Yeah, so deleting data is, I mean, it's possible, but it also depends on like who had have had access to that data. So the ceramic is like an open network, which means that if I publish a document, like only I will store that document until someone else is like interested in that document, or like sees that I published something about that document, and they might like copy that data. So there is no way to like enforce that they remove that data. But if you kind of remove it locally, and no one else has like replicated the data, then it will be gone. I could also imagine like things where the document references a schema that actually includes like a legal contract that says like, if this user signs a message that says that this data is to be deleted, then you're kind of legally required to delete the data. So I think things like that will be more prevalent in the future. But there is no like cryptographic way of doing that.
Okay, so thanks. So it's actually what happens with IPFS as well. So you upload, you are hosting it until someone else replicates that. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Any other questions? We have a couple minutes left. Nope.
Mike, just thinking about the answer you gave before about 3-box integration of ceramic. I think the benefits are probably myriad, but could you talk about, from the perspective of the 3-box system, the benefits you foresee, or maybe like the top benefit, or I don't know how you want to approach that answer, but just interested in one benefit or many benefits, but we only have a few minutes. So.
Yeah, so I'll say 2. And that's like, I guess, decentralization and modularity, abstractly. Sort of like removing any reliance on 3box's hosting services, whether for identity or whether for routing and like being the master host of the information. That no longer has to be the case. And in modularity is basically that, now you're not tied into using an Orbit DB database, like a key value store, a feed store. Now you can use a textile thread, or you can use other peer-to-peer databases that are built on top. So you have more flexibility in the developer experience. And as a result of that, also like migrating the schemas from being in the databases, especially for private data. Like, you don't know, if you're an app developer and you request data from a user and they give you access to a private database, then you sync that data, you have no idea what shape it's going to come in. Like, a priori, you just don't know. And so by publishing those and separating them, you can actually sort of like observe the ceramic network, like almost browse a marketplace of data sources and schemas. So which apps are saving data in which schema, and then you can pull all that in to the client and like request that data from the user, and exactly, like, I'll get data from this app in the schema. And so you can actually design your application better around the available data sources on the network, rather than it sort of being random. Like, I'm going to ask to open the MetaMask space. Like, is there a MetaMask space? Does this user have it? Like, there's no way of knowing. And so now by migrating that, you have this like marketplace of resources that you can pull into your app.
Thanks.
Cool. So 1 minute left. Any last questions? If not, hopefully we'll see some of you next Thursday. Cool. All right. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.